Hello, everyone, and welcome to what promises to be a very eye-opening discussion on the military applications of AI. Now, countries over the last few years have started to essentially experiment, build, develop, enhance, essentially trying to experiment with the automation of their militaries. This can be seen in the case of weapon systems, of drones, battle tanks, submarine systems. Essentially, these are weapon systems which, with the help of AI systems, can be used without human intervention. Uh, these have been seen in recent conflicts, such as the Israel-Hamas conflict, as well as the Russia-Ukraine conflict as well. These raise certain questions. For example, do we need to sort of clarify the safeguards and practices which need to regulate these AI risks in military domain? We also sort of need to look at, is there a platform or an avenue for international collaboration to regulate these risks? So with that being said, I would like to turn to Ms. Nakamitsu for my first and opening question. Ms. Nakamitsu, the question here is, how has the global UN disarmament agenda evolved, considering the increasing integration of AI in the military domain? It's a lot of similarity there with nuclear technology as well, which is also dual use. How does the UN Disarmament Office Affairs look at regulating AI in the military domain?
Thank you. Well, before answering your question, nuclear and AI, we look at it quite differently. AI is not a weapon. It's enabling and disruptive technologies. Of course, nuclear weapons is nuclear weapons. There is, of course, a concerning sort of a linkage issue of AI into nuclear weapons systems, as I touched on in my remarks. But AI is not really a weapon as such. We just need to think about the application of that technology that is very much dual technology, much bigger than a dual technology, multi-purpose technology compared to the nuclear side. But just going to the UN's process, in 2018, the Secretary General issued first ever his initiative of disarmament agenda. And there he really narrowed in and really focused on the importance of human control over artificial intelligence in any military applications, including, of course, the laws, lethal autonomous weapon systems. So ever since, I have been sending very strong message that the thought of machines actually killing humans without human intervention is a repugnant one, and it has to be prohibited by international law. And since then, this year, in the summer, in July, the Secretary General issued a new agenda for peace policy brief, in which he also referred to a broader AI issues. And in the military domain, he recommended two things. One is that all member states of the UN developed its national strategy for developing, designing, and using AI. And then the second is to start really working on the development of norms and rules through multilateral process, which is, by the way, multi-stakeholder process. He also emphasizes. So that's really key priority agenda for the Secretary General. Now, I am a little bit leaving the military area, but he also made a big recommendation related to artificial intelligence in general, with a very strong awareness that there has to be a broader governance framework for the AI overall, not just the military, but artificial intelligence. And as a result, he established very recently, in October, he set up his high-level advisory body of artificial intelligence. That's for the broader governance of AI. But this body will be making recommendations on the governance models and options for the artificial intelligence. And they are now starting to deliberate on what kind of risks and challenges that are there. So that's also part of the UN's process that touches on the military and security aspect as well.
I just want to pick on something which you had said in your remarks about how the UN had recommended that there should be a national strategy for AI. General Shukla, I just wanted to come to you on this. Essentially, as a country with the largest armed forces in the world, how does India look at possibly having a national plan for AI? And where does AI essentially lie in the scheme of things for the Indian Armed Forces?
Yeah, so, let me just give you my impression of how I see the AI landscape unfolding, especially in the national security domain. What is the extant reality? So the first point is that, AI and the penumbra of associated technologies like synthetic biology, quantum, robotics, the aggregate wave is so powerful and consequential that it will create a new set of strategic haves and have-nots. It is, going to create a set of new winners and losers in the international system. So the geopolitical national security dimension is indeed very powerful. And the first point that I would like to make here is, there are huge possibilities and there are great perils. But what should not happen in India, in my view, is that we should not let the risk debate, which is very important, there are ways of addressing it, but let it not overwhelm the opportunity one. And let me give you an example with space. What happened in India with space? As late as 2012, while India was saying that we will not militarize space, everybody else was smartly leveraging space for ISR, for targeting. It is a virtual war-fighting domain today. The consequence of that is there for us to see. While in the exploration domain, ISRO is doing so well, commercial space we are poor, and in the military dimension we lag greatly. In the LEO orbit, we are virtually absent, which is where all the good stuff is happening. So the way we shape these debates is extremely consequential. And I'm not undermining the risk dimension. There are very good ways of doing it, but we must not fall prey, and especially when a competitor is somebody like China, whose hallmark is how to leverage technological advantages and economic surpluses very smartly into the currencies of hard power and the military. So it is, it will be extremely unwise to do it. The second is that when it comes to national security, AI has already moved to the heart of strategizing and war fighting and capabilities. Let me look at the PLA. The Strategic Support Force is what? They have created a separate service for digital enablement and AI enablement. A service like an Army, Navy, Air Force. The Americans are, deeply into AI, effective AI, militarily effective yet responsible. So I make the point that AI is unstoppable in national security. It is it is utilitarian, and it is central to deterrence and also to attain strategic advantage across the continuum of competition, crisis, conflict, and war fighting. Now, the challenge for Indian defense is what? If I may just come to that very briefly, is to integrate AI at speed and scale while ensuring that it is safe, it is efficacious, and there is warfighter trust. So when you talk of warfighter trust, safety is inbuilt into it. It should be effective, and the ethical dimensions of industrial fighting will also apply in the digital domain. So it is very much possible. I'll just give you an example of how utilitarian AI is, say, in the dimension of competition. Look at February 23. The Chinese send that balloon over the United States. The mighty American military is dumbfounded. It shoots it down. But it takes an AI startup, synthetic AI, using rapid automated image categorization to trace the evolution of the balloon from origin to where it was about. So is this not utilitarian? Is this not thoroughly responsible? You get attributability, which was unavailable to you in the cyberspace. So, I'll come to some other issues of what we should do in the Indian, but just two quick points. In my view, we should, this dual use, civil military, it is entirely well-meaning, but I'll tell you how it pans out in the real world. So while we, with very good reason, we say civil capacities, military capacities, civil-military fusion lies at the core of Chinese strategic thinking. So just at this point, there are Huawei teams doing, facial recognition projects, autonomous vehicle projects. PLA teams are built into it. So the military dimensions in real time are transferred to the LAC. So we should again not fall prey to the civil-military fusion, because these are the strategic consequences. And in my opening remarks, if I may just quote Henry Kissinger, no less than Henry Kissinger in the age of AI, he says the biggest mistake will be to cede opportunity in this space. So the only way you can talk responsible AI is from a position of strength. And therefore, my whole argument is that we must leverage AI because it is a fact of life. Do it smartly, do it responsibly, efficaciously, it can be done. But the defining debates, the 2 points that I made, in terms of bad AI and good AI, I see the intent, but they will unfold in very wrong ways, and I don't think we should fall prey to it. So those could be the opening remarks. What specifically we should do in the case of India, I could come to a little later.
Thank you for that, General Shukla. I want to again, just borrow something which you said about this constant battle between innovation versus regulation. Right, the two might not be mutually exclusive. The two can be done together at the same time. And so this brings me to Professor John Tassiolis. The question essentially is that for any regulation to essentially take place over, I guess, autonomous weapons, you would need to have sufficient human supervision over there. And so the question here arises whether, how do we go about ensuring that the regulation of the systems is also compatible with international humanitarian law as well? Do you believe that the current regime for regulation of military applications of AI is consistent with the humanitarian law regime?
I think that's a very important question, to begin at least with the law. And if we begin with the law, then there are serious questions about whether autonomous weapon systems would be compatible. I mean, the law requires a number of distinctions to be drawn. For example, the distinction between combatants who may be deliberately killed in the context of war and non-combatants who cannot be intentionally killed. They can be killed as a side effect of achieving a military objective. Do you have AI that actually can distinguish between a soldier and a child with a gun, a toy gun? Do we have AI that can make judgments of proportionality, that it can judge correctly that killing a certain number of civilians as a side effect is justified in order to achieve a given military objective? And then there's a further question. Can we apply concepts like intention to AI systems, especially given issues around explainability regarding how they function? So I guess the first thing I'd want to say to you is you're absolutely right to begin with the question, does existing international humanitarian law, can that be complied with by AI? And I'm suggesting there are serious questions. But I think there's a further question. And the further question is this: are we happy to rest only with existing international humanitarian law? And I think we shouldn't be happy with that, because that law has a very peculiar feature to it, which is it enables people to do things that are, in other circumstances, legally permits people to do things that are morally terrible, i.e. it legally permits people to kill others who don't deserve to be killed, who have a right not to be killed. Now, there's a reason it does that. There are very specific reasons it does that, but those reasons apply to humans being in a context of battle. So because someone's in a context of battle, because, for example, there's the fog of war and uncertainty, there's uncertainty about the justness of my cause versus the justice of the opponent's cause, because maybe I've been forced to fight, I had no real choice. For all these reasons that are related to human vulnerability, we allow these special exemptions to exist in the case of war. We say someone in an unjust cause can kill someone in a just cause. We say that innocent civilians can be killed if the military advantage is sufficient. That's a concession to human frailty. That's an assumption that the combatants are humans and share our nature. Now, once you have autonomous weapon systems, that assumption is out of place. An autonomous weapon system doesn't have a right to self-defense in the way that a human being does. It doesn't have the same issues around the fog of war or being overcome by emotion. So though I agree with your initial points that the law is a starting point and there must be compliance with law, we then have to raise the question, yes, but this law was fashioned for a certain kind of warfare. And if states are going to be hell-bent on developing AI, an autonomous weapon system, in order to further their own advantage, then as with other evils in the past, international law will have to respond to that and potentially change.
Thank you, Professor. I think there might be a different view in certain quarters, there could be a possible perception that there is indeed an earnest effort underway to basically make sure that that thing you brought about, distinguishing between combatants and civilians, can be done. So Eric, at this summit, we have actually heard plenty of discussions about the need to, audit systems, explainable AI, increase the reliability of AI systems. What is the recent U.S. Political declaration on the responsible use of military and AI? How does it deal with that? How does it go about enhancing capacity building in the U.S. with respect to that?
Thanks so much, Conrad, and thank you to Carnegie India for the opportunity to come here and talk about the work the United States is doing on developing these systems responsibly. As we've heard throughout this conference, there are risks and opportunities with all of this technology. There are ways to address it through legal means, through non-binding means, through arms control treaties, as we were talking about here. But from the United States perspective, we're coming at this, much like most of the other AI applications are coming at it, is that we need to look at this technology and develop it responsibly. There are ways to develop artificial intelligence for military applications across the whole spectrum, because as the Undersecretary has mentioned, it's not just lethal autonomous weapons systems or the Terminators, as we were talking about earlier today, but it is those questions of decision-making tools. You could consider an autopilot to be an artificial intelligence system. And so what we've created is a system of 10 foundational principles, and I'm disappointed to know that Google has 11, so we're going to have to work on that. But these principles are designed to help countries develop AI and integrate it into their militaries in a responsible manner. So it talks about avoiding bias, avoiding automation bias, about having oversight, about creating those testing environments that ensure that you can effectively, use these capabilities in a way that is consistent with international humanitarian law, consistent with the purpose of the weapons system. And so while we have launched these principles, we launched it just a couple weeks ago on November 13th. 47 states have joined us so far. We had another 50 in the room that seemed very interested in this declaration. Our goal is to bring all of these countries together, all of the countries of the world, because all countries of the world are going to start experimenting with AI, whether it's using these large language models or trying to develop other systems on their own. And let's start exchanging best practices. How do you avoid bias? How do you create an auditable methodology for your weapon system? And so we think this is a great way to get after those norms of responsible behavior that the Undersecretary talked about, that the Secretary General in particular is talking about. And we're hoping that all the countries of the world will help come together so we can exchange these best practices, iterate our principles, right? Our principles are not certainly locked in stone. They are something that is going to have to evolve as we understand this technology, just as we've been talking about all along about civil and commercial applications of AI. That all applies to the military domain, and that's where we're hoping to get a lot of countries to work with us on this.
Thank you. Ambassador, I wanted to follow up with a similar question with respect to the Indian vantage point. What is India doing when it comes to pursuing the responsible use of military in AI? How does India go about doing it? What is India's perception when it comes to establishing global consensus? Is there a consensus there for India to join?
Thank you. I'll answer the last part first. There is a consensus which an Indian diplomat helped craft and on something called lethal autonomous weapon systems. And the debate on that actually predates the debate on military AI. That debate began with robotics and weapons systems. And then military AI has acquired prominence of late and has acquired a particular salience after the development of large language models, ChatGPT, and so on. There's been a debate which has been going on this for about the last 6, or not a debate, a process underway, a multilateral process, a cohesive multilateral process underway, which has achieved results. Now, first, some background. Artificial intelligence is a fact. War is a fact. Those are, there's an old saying that only the dead have seen the end of war. And as the professor here said, humanitarian law helps to balance military necessity with the humanitarian imperative. And it's our job as diplomats and lawyers to work that out. Of course, I mean, diplomats and lawyers, as I think George Bernard Shaw said about economists, if you put them, all of them in, together end to end, they may not agree. And this, fortunately, we have agreed on some things. This is not the first technology that has affected warfare. Electricity affected warfare. There were conversations on aerial bombing and submarines in the 1930s. So there is a sort of a history in arms control about how we deal with these things. Another point I'd like to make is that technology should not be stigmatized. AI has a lot of uses. Anybody who's attended this event, I mean, I was particularly struck by Mr. Nilekani's presentation about how AI can be used for the development of countries like ours. Similarly, in the military field, AI gives military advantages, and that's why it's being deployed. And the question is that military advantage lawful or not? I mean, what kind of advantages? As the professor here says, it helps what's, in Clausewitzian terms, pierce the fog of war, reduce the friction of battle, help better targeting, improves the quality of decision-making, military decision-making. These are all facts of life. The question is, how do you balance this with the humanitarian imperative? So as I began, when I began, I talked about the process underway in a treaty called the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons, which has a group working on lethal autonomous weapon systems, and it's been working on this since 2016. And this group has agreed that the laws of war apply to these to lethal autonomous weapon systems. India has has agreed to take on that obligation, including to their potential development and use. There are other uses or other benefits that the system has produced. Don't forget that when we started discussing these systems, Ambassador Venkat Verma is somewhere in this audience. I think he did my job about a decade ago. There was no lexicon, no terminology, no understanding of how these weapons worked and what was the sort of the legal landscape. As in responsible AI or in the use of AI in the civilian domain, these concepts in the military domain were developed in discussions held over a period of time. So, it is difficult, therefore, to separate, in some ways, the development of norms in the military field from what's happening in the civilian field. After all, if autonomy were possible, somebody would be making a lot of money driving autonomous cars. So this is not a given fact. It's very much an evolving field. There's no doubt that it has to be that this is a powerful technology which has to be used responsibly. And what are we doing as diplomats and as lawyers to take this forward? I would say that we are focused on 3 areas. We accept that international humanitarian law changes with time. There are some principles that are eternal, and the humanitarian imperative is eternal. How you manifest it through the laws of proportionality, distinction, etc. These changes, and we are working on it. These are areas that are difficult in the best of times, and with an evolving technology in a war-like situation, these are more difficult than usual. And I would say that we should not hurry these along. The second is there are norms. There's a norm against the use of biological weapons. There's a norm against the use of chemical weapons. Is there a norm in the case of AI? I think that the fact that we have guiding principles seems to indicate that there is a norm. And the last point that I'd like to make is that there's also a case for specific prohibitions and regulations. So these are the 3 or 4 areas in which we are working to develop a framework for use of AI in this. Before finishing, I'd like to thank Carnegie and Rudra, and you particularly, Rudra in particular, for organizing this event. It's extremely useful, and we hope to continue to benefit from this. Thank you.
Ambassador, I had a follow-up question. So given the expansive benefits of AI, which you just mentioned, and also how it's constantly evolving as well, there is this need to sort of think about, is there a risk of overregulation as well? I mean, would that possibly lead to this issue of blunting innovation in AI? If there's an expansive definition of what really constitutes AI which can be regulated, would that possibly blunt innovation?
I think that's a very good question. The best answer that I can give you is that we deal with the business of war. Okay, and in war, the two things that we look at are military advantage and humanitarian how to balance it with humanitarian aim. The regulation of AI is a question which applies to the civilian world and to the development of weapons with laws. It's still an open debate. And this is not a debate, I think, which has a straight answer. I think it's something in which we have to find the balance as we go along. That's what makes it so complicated. There are no straightforward answers to this anyway. What is artificial intelligence, firstly? What is autonomy? I mean, at what extent, where does human agency, as the professor here pointed out, where does it stop? Where does it begin? How do you regulate that? I mean, does it make a difference to the development of national power, which is a legitimate national objective for all of us? So we are working on answers to all of these questions and finding the necessary balances.
Sure. So clearly there are massive advantages to the military when it comes from AI systems. So Professor Ben Israel, I wanted to come to you at this point. How important has AI been to Israel's military advantage? Do you see it possibly even complementing the armed forces in the future, sort of maybe taking over, in terms of manned forces? What is the current status when it comes to how Israel views military applications of AI? I think you're on mute. Sir, I think you would have to speak up. You are currently on mute, or I think you would have to speak up a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah, now it's fine.
Do you hear me now?
Yes, it's all
Okay.
fine. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me, and I apologize if in the middle I would have to run away to a shelter, because as you know, we are in a war now, and rockets are launched until now. I start with an example. Until now, there were some 10,000 rockets launched in the current round. Almost all of them were intercepted by a weapon system, Israeli weapon system called Iron Dome, which utilized AI. So let me say how. I mean, once a rocket is launched, the time depends on the range. And sometimes the time that you have from launch to impact is only 30 seconds. We don't have enough time for human beings to analyze the situation, decide what to do. We need to take an immediate decision where in Israel we should alarm the civilian population. And this is all done by an entirely autonomous system. I mean, the decision to shoot an interceptor and shoot down a rocket, men are involved only in the sense that they turn on the system. That's all. All the rest is done autonomously, and more than this, the algorithms that are used by the system, including the interception algorithm, based on machine learning, on the experience that we unfortunately have. I mean, until now, where there were tens of thousands of rockets launched in the last 20 years against Israel, and we feed back the system we give the system feedback from what happened, and the algorithms are changing themselves automatically, autonomously, using the machine learning methods that we are all aware of. So when you say autonomous systems should never be used in the battlefield, it's this is a case in which we use autonomous system for defense, but this example tells you how complicated things can be and how sometimes general observations or general principles cannot hold. We use AI because we don't have any other alternative. I mean, 10,000 rockets could have thousands of casualties, and the only way to fight against it is to intercept those rockets in air. And the time that we have because of Israel is not India. Sometimes, as I told you, there are only 30 seconds. Time is too short for human intervention, thinking, etc. We use AI not only for this, but for many other military applications. When I say use, I mean now in the current round, in this war. For example, if I still go with the example of rockets, once you detect a rocket in air, as I said, sometimes you don't have enough time even to alarm the civil population, and therefore you better destroy the launchers before they launch it. But those launchers are hidden. They are hidden among many times in relatively deserted areas, and you cannot destroy them before they are prepared to launch the rocket, the launchers. And the launchers, and then you don't have enough time. So you have to integrate to cross a lot of information coming from different sources in order to understand that these activities that now you observe through your UAVs or satellites or any other sensors, this activity is actually preparing, opening the hiding places, preparing a launcher to launch rockets against us. And you have to do it on large areas. A lot of activity is done there. How do you distinguish between this activity and that activity and filter out only those which prepare rockets to be launched? Information, I mean, we have a lot of sensors. No human beings can overcome the task in time. I mean, on time, we can do it, but it takes a lot of time. Therefore, again, we use computers, we use machine learning, teach the machine how past activities were seen, etc., etc. And in order to what we call incriminate and form a target which is really something connected to those launchers. Israel is a small country. We have something like 6-7 million Jews. We sit in an area surrounded by something 400 million Arabs, and the ratio is 1 to 60. The only way we can survive until we will be recognized by this neighborhood, the only way we can survive is not by any numeric advantage, but by using technology, science, and of course human talent, which is the base for everything. So for us, it's not, and the question you asked is not something abstract, more philosophical in a way, etc. It's a matter of daily life.
That's an excellent point, and I think it brings me to my next question, which is that there's a lot of attention often paid to the offensive aspects of AI, right? But when we look at early warning systems, is there a need to entertain the possible notion that sometimes the use of AI in the military domain can actually help saving lives and reduce civilian casualties? So Professor Tassioulis, is there a conversation which needs to be had on this? How, usually the conversation is always about massive civilian casualties, doomsday scenario playing out. Is there a possibility that early warning systems, based on machine learning algorithms, could possibly lead to a situation where we actually save more lives?
So I think, again, this
is what is happening in Israel, by the way.
Again,
just now.
This is for Professor
10,000
Tsiolis.
rockets, 10,000 rockets, very few casualties due to the rockets because of the use of AI and technology like this.
Sure, noted. Professor Tsiolis, yeah.
Yes, so I think it's very important to bear in mind that the use of AI, as has already been mentioned, can be other than in the use of force. It can be in various contexts to do with, for example, if you had, for example, reliable blockchain information shared between combatants, maybe that would hasten a ceasefire because they'd get a better picture of the state of play. You could have situations where you'd be better able to deliver humanitarian aid to those who need it, and other sort of contexts. So I think there is a conversation to be had about that, but I just want to pick up on the one point you made there about it could lessen casualties. And I think this is something that we need to bear in mind when people talk about autonomous weapon systems. They say, well, the great benefit potentially is that it will lessen casualties in war. And I think that is a very important consideration, but it's always important to bear in mind this, even that consideration cannot be treated as a simple utilitarian consideration. There are many things one can do to lessen casualties. You could threaten to kill innocent people and say, unless you surrender, we will kill innocent people. We will drop a nuclear bomb. That might be an effective way to lessen casualties, but it's illegal. And it's immoral. So there isn't a simple utilitarian numbers game here to be played. There's a number of considerations that have to be factored in. Lessening casualties is one of them, but there are also considerations like respecting human dignity. And I think the point that Ms. Nakamitsu made earlier about the awful sort of horror that someone's life was taken away through an autonomous process involving no human intervention. In other words, that it may be somehow against human dignity to take someone's life away through that sort of autonomous process really raises questions like how human rights now need to respond to this situation and whether there are certain decisions that we have a human right should not be made by machines.
So clearly there are severe risks, right? I mean, this really pretty much merits the regulation of military applications of AI. But then the question which follows up is that what is the possible way to approach that problem? For instance, we have, as you mentioned, the UN announced a global advisory body on regulation of AI as well. This is in addition to the REAM summit, which took this place earlier in February as well. So even if you were to regulate the military applications of AI, could there be a possible fragmentation at work over here, leading to a lack of a coherent approach, Ms. Nakamitsu? Do you feel that's a possibility, fragmentation of regulation?
Yes. Before answering to that, let me just touch on two things. One, the positive use of AI in the military, I think it's something that we should be really spending much more time on. For example, verification of disarmament agreements. I think there's an enormous scope for the AI to actually make really great contributions. But we're not really talking, I'm a lady from the dark side, so I only get to usually talk about the really dark, really risk sort of issues. But we are definitely looking at what can the AI do to contribute. So that's one thing. The second thing, the risks. Everyone talked about humanitarian risks. But I also want to make sure that, and Professor Ben Israel touched on it, but I just wanted to highlight security risks as well. I mentioned very briefly in my remarks that the time for decision will be compressed with the AI, and Professor Israel also talked about that as well. There is a serious risk, I think, of inadvertent escalation, which could be potentially uncontrollable escalation, especially if everyone were to actually get into a preemptive psyche. Before we are attacked, we have to launch attack, first strike. Then I think there is a huge risk of escalation. And that is something that the international security community really has to be switched on. So it's not just about the humanitarian risks that we're talking about. Now, about the regulations, indeed, I think there are many different ways of regulating this. As Ambassador Anupam mentioned, there is a deliberation taking place. There are a couple of things. Now, in order for these discussions to actually bear fruit, they definitely have to be a political will. And there has to be continuous momentums and push from the civil society, academia, broader community to push the political leaders to actually have that momentum. But also there is a need for further technical discussions to achieve a common understanding of what it is that we're talking about. For example, fully autonomous weapon systems. What does that mean in reality? If you talk to different countries, different governments, they come up with slightly different definitions. So in this kind of discussions, definitional, technical discussions are very important, especially if we want to have a meaningful, effective regulations to come. Now, just a couple of options to ensure human control. I mean, everything in lethal autonomous weapon system is to make sure that it's not going to be the machines that will be making decisions to take human lives. That, as I mentioned, it is a red line for the entire humanity. It's not just about governments, international community, it's for us, the human community should not allow that to happen. Now, that's why we emphasize responsibility across the life cycle of AI, from the designing phase, data collection, deployment, development, and application and the use. So, there are a couple of options that we think we can regulate these. For example, specific restrictions on a weapon system in its design phase. For example, to limit the scope of its use in terms of, for example, duration of its use or the terrain of use. That's one approach. Another might be regulating so-called human-machine interactions, incorporating or including during the design phase, again, supervision of actions on the machine by humans, or incorporating human intervention methods into the weapon system. So that's one way of doing it. And yet the third one is to come up with a straightforward limitation on the use of AI-enabled weapon systems. And this is very much straightforward humanitarian, in specific environment, for example, not to use those weapon systems in populated areas precisely to protect civilians. So there are different approaches. Again, all these different approaches of discussions really have to go hand in hand with the technical deepening of understanding and arriving at a common approaches. But so I am hopeful if there is a political will and all of us understanding that we cannot allow machines to come and kill us, then I am hopeful that this can be done in the multilateral settings.
General Shukla, I know that you wanted to comment on this point, right?
See, since I come from the so-called bad world, let me say a few things in defense of the bad guys. So, the first point is that even before UN steps in, why will not sovereign governments be responsible enough in the induction of AI? Well, what is that presumption? So may I postulate that harnessing the power of AI for national security is a public good. It is in the national interest, and governments are responsible enough. And especially militaries let me say about the militaries. Militaries by themselves have zero competence to develop AI. So it has to come from the civilian world. And all democratic militaries are subject to very strong political and, may I also say, technical and bureaucratic control. So these lethal autonomous weapons scenario is one scenario, but that is just 1% of the whole AI spectrum. Let's see what the Americans and the Chinese are doing, the two leads in AI, and then, I'll say what we should do. So look at the Americans. Who's driving AI in Pentagon? It's Craig Martel. Craig Martel was doing machine learning for Lyft, a cab company. He has come in. Why? Because the militaries should have the humility to acknowledge that when we are talking of generative AI, where data sets are exploding, computing power is exploding, it's simply beyond the capacities of militaries. So there will be layers and layers of civilian control, as you see, all those people who have come in, they are all civilians. So, I mean, that's the first point that I would like to make. Now, just see the dangers if you don't act. See, what is China doing? Without violating any law, it is taking sensors and shooters across 7 domains: land, sea, air, subsea, seabed, space, EW, cyber, to using AI to integrate sensor shooters. You have violated no law. And what phenomenal capacity you have created. This is how AI is being used. And just one point where I would like to make, Anupam made this point, that AI is just one technology. I would suggest it's game changing. If I just quote M.O. Godard, if I pronounce his name right, he says Einstein had an IQ of 160. Chat GPT-4 is 155. Chat GPT-6 in 2 years will be 10 times. So what we should worry about are different things. So, what should the Indian military do? In my view, there is a domain where you have to compete aggressively. And in all humility, you are nowhere. Where is our computing power? Where are our data sets? Algorithmic warfare. All that has to be developed. China and US are streets ahead in this. So that's, one point. Yes, there are worrisome domains like AI complicating strategic deterrence, nuclear posture, bioweapons. Those must be contained aggressively. And there are, yet emerging domains. For example, AI and quantum, that's really worrying. I'm told quantum supremacy, or in the world of quantum supremacy, a problem that would take 10,000 years to solve will get solved in 200 seconds. Now look what AI and quantum will do. And the singularity moment, when digital brains become better than human brains and they become autonomous. Now those are the things which we must confabulate with. What will quantum do to encryption? Encryption is so central to military performance. So I should say there is one domain where none of these laws are being violated. We have to compete aggressively, and India is nowhere. We have a long way to go. And there are other worrisome domains where we must, contain aggressively, bioweapons and all. And the third, we must confabulate now. If we don't do it now, it will be too late 10 years later. And just one final point I would like to make. See, in the Indian context, this is a domain, somebody raised innovation regulation. This is high performance stuff. So it has to be very high innovation. When we proceed to induct it, it cannot be, an L1 contest. It has to be talent search. Now, if it has to be talent search, the critical question is who's going to do it? So in my view, the brightest spot are the startups for which we have laid an edifice, and the private sector. They must come, help the military to do this and exercise all kinds of civilian control. The military
this great conversation here. As Undersecretary Nakamitsu said, there's great advantages to these tools as well. You talked about the sort of the doom side of quantum. Quantum sensing could really help us in arms control and verification as well, just as AI could. And it's one of the things we're looking at is how can we use these new tools to bring stability? And one of the areas where I think the military aspect fails compared to the discussions in civil is we've heard a lot throughout this, innovate quickly, fail fast. Well, we don't want to have a situation where your decision-making tool is giving you bad results because you've built it too quickly. That could create all kinds of instability and lead to conflict. And that's why we need to have these responsible behaviors that countries come together. They understand what it means to have this, what it means to get the data out of these tools, and then how to use that data appropriately and not immediately just rely on the machine for making that data. And then just to add, finally, you're seeing the debate between human control and human judgment. That is a debate that needs to continue. If you imagine the autopilot of an aircraft, is that an AI? It's designed to save the pilot if he's going to crash. Well, maybe don't let the human have control because the computer may be making the life-saving decision that the human can't make. Thank you.
Right. I think we are almost just 20 seconds short of a session ending. So I'll just go to the audience for one quick question from the audience for a Q&A. I'm sorry we can only entertain one, so I think raise your hand and somebody will come to you with a mic. Please introduce yourself and direct the question at someone specifically, please. Yeah. Sir, please. Can you have a microphone?
Thank you. My name is Yogendra Kumar, retired Indian Foreign Service. My question actually is that when we talk about AI integration to, let's say, military hardware decision making, what are the CBMs, verifiability, transparency, by means of which the other countries can be certain and be sure that all the understandings, all the rules of behavior, responsible behavior, are actually
Right? When you think about the CBMs that were created over the course of the Cold War, it took us decades to figure those all out. We're certainly at the beginning of needing to think about that. We think the responsible behaviors approach, the principles that we've put together, the guidelines that we will create will be a good first step. But then we need to figure out how you test these things. Is there a way to test these in ways that build confidence? I don't know that we're there yet, given the black box nature of AI. And so there is going to need to be work to do that, but also the stability between states as well. How do you work on that so that they're not concerned if they are facing an AI-enabled adversary, that they're going to launch some sort of preemptive attack or something like that. So there is a lot of work that is going to need to be done over the next couple of decades to think about those confidence-building measures.
So with that, I'd like to give the final word to Ambassador Ray to close this entire session now.
Thank you. I mean, verification and compliance is a very important part of arms control. In fact, we talked about two things. One is unintended escalation and the humanitarian aspect. But it is very important to frame an obligation during the process in a way that can be verified. And that is what is actually one of the most technically complex things to do. We have examples of verification across various domains, conventional, nuclear, emerging technologies. AI is a cross-cutting issue. So a combination of existing CBM agreement in this area.
So with that, I think we're at the end of our session. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. And yeah, time's up.